All right, you guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the channel. I'm driving the 2022 Hyundai Veloster N DCT. I was really hoping that it was gonna be sunny out today and dry. It looked that way when I left. It's damp on the roads. So I guess this is also going to turn out to be a good test for these Pirelli P0 tires. But let's get into it. Let's go for a drive. Okay, we're gonna start in drive modes. We are going to start in custom N mode. And we are going to set the launch control, because we can actually set the launch control to 3,500 RPM. You can set it to pretty much any RPM you want up to 3,500. Very happy it's here. Although why would you set it for anything other than 3,500 RPM? But wow, lots of spin in the wet. Wow, that was violent. That was incredibly violent. It didn't know what to do there for a second and when to shift into second. And then when it finally did, then it was like, okay, full turbo, full boost. And then we're game from there. Okay. Under the hood is an aluminum block, aluminum head, 2-liter, direct injection, 4-cylinder turbo engine. It's got a twin scroll turbo, so because of the firing order of this engine, what you get is quicker spool up and just unbelievable response. So 275 horsepower, 260 pound-feet of torque. I've already got a grin on my face, and I haven't even gone into grin shift mode. New feature for the 8-speed dual clutch models of this car. What that does is temporarily increases the torque output from 260 to 278 pound-feet of torque. And grin shift, we have 20 seconds of grin shift here. We'll do a second gear pull. Wow. Definitely didn't notice the extra torque. What I did notice is the quicker shift there. I got a huge chirp, actually just straight up spin, shifting from second to third. Oh, and then I have to wait 3 minutes to do grin shift. So after my first roll race, I can't roll race for another 3 minutes? He's already taken his exit. That peak torque is of course down at 1450 RPM, so it's very low down in the power band, and then we can rev all the way up to 6,900 RPM. I don't know if you guys can see on the GoPro there, the screen. Hopefully you can. We go into settings here. I point this out in my POV video, but you can actually individually adjust all of these settings that you would expect, and it has an exhaust baffle, so you can adjust from normal mode, Sport Plus, ELSD, how aggressively you want the electronically controlled mechanical LSD to lock up. We can also adjust the transmission, how quickly it and aggressively it shifts on the upshifts and downshifts. And see there, we just put it in normal. Got really lazy for a second, went down to 1,600 RPM. Of course, engine, which increases throttle response, especially at the top bit of the pedal. I haven't actually noticed a difference in the brake pedal. So in normal mode on everything, the brake pedal is still that twitchy kind of hot hatch feel. Adaptive dampers, of course, here on the Veloster N, and we can go from normal, sport to Sport Plus. Sport Plus is, I mean, here's where we get into it. This is a KDM car, as some would call it, Korean domestic market. This is a Korean manufactured car, and what I would not expect, but is the case here, this car was actually developed in part on the Nürburgring. That's where they fine-tuned the engine and chassis for this car, which is fascinating. They actually worked with, I don't know exactly the relationship here, how closely they worked with him, but the previous M division head worked on this car. So as the peak of M has absolutely been passed and is tucked away neatly in the rearview mirror, here we have a little bit of that older M DNA coming through. But suspension mode, it's so incredibly stiff in Sport Plus. I always have it in normal mode. If I found maybe, I mean, this road isn't actually too bad, but if I found the perfect road, the perfect tarmac, very smooth, freshly paved, then maybe I would get, you know, increased feedback coming through the steering and through the tires there, but I always leave it in Sport. But I just love this layout. This is something that I've never really seen. It's very intuitive, it works, it's visually different, especially when compared to something like the GTI. Marginally shorter gearing here with the 8-speed DCT. I mean, here, I guess the biggest question with this video, especially for me, because not much else has changed with this car since the prior car. I'll get to the minor changes there are, but is it worth it? Should you get the DCT over the manual? The answer is obvious to that question. If you're expecting something other than the obvious, no, you should always go with the third pedal car. That's the answer here. I'm not going to give you a separate answer. Those of you who think otherwise, we're just not of the same breed, and I'm hoping quite a few people who still watch the channel are of my mindset of, yeah, third pedal or bust here, even in 2022. This is the final stretch. The dual clutch is great. I find it awesome. I mean, this is probably, it's gotta be one of the least expensive vehicles, especially that's this fun, to have a dual clutch. In the States, the Veloster N starts at $33,000, which is actually a couple $1,000s more than a brand new GTI. I have not driven a brand new GTI. This does have more power. It has roughly the same amount of torque, but it does have quite a bit more power here. So more power and it's more expensive. The Veloster N isn't quite as much of a value proposition as it was when it came out in 2019. The Veloster N's uphill battle is, of course, the brand cachet that the other manufacturers have and that the Veloster N doesn't quite have. They do compete in WRC, but worthy to note as well, the GTI does not have real torque vectoring. That has brake-based torque vectoring, whereas here on the Veloster N, we have legitimate torque vectoring. Again, just the amount of surprise that I'm feeling through this car, through this chassis, is phenomenal. You get that Nürburgring kind of essence and vibes out of this car, even in normal mode. Softest suspension setting, no road trips. You're gonna hate yourself if you take this on a road trip. There's no adjustable lumbar on these seats. Actually, these seats are new to the Veloster N when compared to when it launched, and they're great. They're much closer to like a Focus RS seat. They've got a bunch more bolstering than the original seats, and they look so much better. The materials are better. They don't look as Hyundai, as Korean, as, I have to say it, cheap as the 2019 seats. And they have this really cool illuminating, maybe I'm stretching, maybe it's not very cool, maybe it's just cool, illuminating N symbol on the seats here, which come on at night and when you're just parking the car. So if that's your thing, then you've got that on tap. Okay, we'll do another launch control here. We'll see if it hooks up. I'm guessing it's not going to. Pulling way to the right. Huge amount of torque steer. It's just, there is actually quite a bit of feel even in the wet here. It's playful. It's not a bad looking vehicle from the front and from the side profile on this side where there's just the one door. It looks fine, it looks great. The rear end is where it kind of falls apart for me. It doesn't really, kind of looks a little bit squished. So when compared to the Veloster N when it came out, it has dated itself a little bit. But now this is in part due to the fact that Hyundai's since come out with of course, the new Elantra N, which has been getting quite a bit of good press recently, which I'm frankly not too surprised about. But one of the biggest things in that car is the addition of a digital dash. Any car that I'm having trouble trying to keep up with the thought at hand while I'm driving hard is a good car, and that's absolutely what's happening here. The digital dash. So here the Veloster N still has the analog dash and the analog gauge cluster, which is a little bit dated here in 2022. I don't mind it. I actually, in most cases, prefer at least an analog tack. It's just phenomenal how chuckable this car is and how fun to drive this car is. Now, steering is electric power steering here. And for an electric power steering rack, there's a surprising amount of feedback coming through. A lot of this, I feel like, comes down to the suspension because it is so hunkered down and there is not a lot of body roll, but just enough to feel and catch that lift-off oversteer before it happens, which is key, of course, because you don't want snap oversteer. This does, according to Car and Driver, what they tested, a 13.8 second quarter mile, and 0 to 60 in 4.8 seconds. Now, it kind of slots itself into a weird part of the market, especially when you look at the fact that it has this weird looking side door, this extra door. One door on this side, two doors on that side. There are a few, touching the interior materials, this is all hard plastic, kind of cheap plastic. The materials haven't changed from the original one. The only touch points that are leather, which I'm thankful they are, is the steering wheel and the shifter, the two things you touch the most. So that's good if you're just looking up. Simple climate controls. Oh, this is actually one thing. Love the mechanical buttons here for the climate control. Everything's here all the time. But when you're just driving, there's nowhere, if I glance down, I can't see my fan speed and I can't see what temperature I've set the climate to. So when I hit the temperature button, then it comes up on the screen and I can see my fan speed, but then I leave it and it disappears. It's not like other manufacturers have got this. Honda's got this and a few other manufacturers. It's always up on the screen. You always have your climate control up on the screen. Even when I'm at the home menu here, it shows the date and the time, but for some reason, the date and the time is more important than how warm my feet are. Anyways, you guys, Veloster N DCT. I have no complaints for the transmission itself. It's very fun, very consistent shifts. Much more consistent than the 10-speed in the new MDX Type S. Will this make you smile? Yes. Is it fun? Yes. Is it fast? Absolutely. Can traction control keep up in the wet? Not really. It's trying. It's doing its best, and that is exactly what I'm getting from the Veloster N. It holds nothing back. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Subscribe if you haven't already. Hit me up on Instagram at Untraveled to see what I'm shooting and driving on a day-to-day basis. and we'll see you guys very soon.